Okay, so put that away for now, and we'll talk about Philippians. So Paul wrote Philippians. There's really no dispute. Some of Paul's letters, there is some dispute, although usually it's based on presuppositions. But nobody really disputes that Paul wrote Philippians. And the church that it was written to was at Philippi. So let's talk about where Philippi was a little bit. So this, as you can see, this is Italy and Sicily. I don't know why there's nothing in between. But, and then this is what we call Greece. This is what we call Turkey. And then this big thing is this inset. So this part is that big part. So Philippi was in what was called Macedonia, north of Greece. And it was about 10 miles from Neapolis, which was an important port city. So it was close. There's a lot of trade that went through there. A lot of travel, and it was a strategic, important city. In fact, Acts 16 tells us as much that it is an important city. One of the main roads of Rome, the Ignatian Way, went right through the middle of town, and being 10 miles from a major port also made them an important city. So consequently, there was a lot of commerce, a lot of business, and a lot of visitors to Philippi. It had been a Roman colony for about 100 years by the time Paul wrote this letter, and that made it important as well. So the church was founded by Paul, and we read about that in Acts 16. So I'm going to read to you what about the founding of the church at Philippi. Are we ready? Yeah. Okay, so, and they went through, so this is Paul and his companions. The day is Paul and his companions. Who wrote the book of Acts?
Luke.
Luke. Okay, so notice something as we go through here. And they went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, that's in Turkey, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. And when they had come up to Mysia, they attempted to go to Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. And a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. What do you notice just shifted? Day to week. Good catch. Luke was joined Paul in the middle of this journey. And so from then on, he talks about we instead of they. And apparently he joined up with them right about then. Yeah. Did I not get out of that? I think I took him back there. Let's pause, shall we? So the church was founded by Paul, and we're in the middle of reading this Acts 16. So setting sail from Troas, we made a direct voyage to Samothrace, and the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which was a leading city in the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city some days, and on the Sabbath day we went outside the gate to the riverside, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had come. This is interesting. There obviously was, when Paul went to a city, where did he usually go first?
The temple.
Yeah, the synagogue, wherever the synagogue was. There was no synagogue in Philippi, okay? But there were Jews, because they go down to the river, and the river was often a place where people would worship if there was no house of worship. And so he goes down there, but who does he find? Women. So there were likely no Jewish, or not many Jewish men, and it was only women that were worshiping by the river. One who heard us was a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple goods. That means she was wealthy. Purple is the kind of the color of the royalty. So She was a wealthy woman, and other things tell us that as well. Who was a worshiper of God. So she was a Jew, or probably wasn't born a Jew, but she was now a Jewish proselyte. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul, and after she was baptized in her household as well, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay," and she prevailed upon us. So Paul and his companions stayed at Lydia's house while they were there. As we were going to the place of prayer by the river, we went and we were met by a slave girl who had a spirit of divination, an evil spirit, and brought her owners much gain by fortune telling. She followed Paul and us, crying out, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to you the way of salvation." And this she kept doing for many days. Paul, having become greatly annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I command you to come out in the name of Jesus to come out of her." And it came out of her that very hour. But when her owners saw that their hope of gain was gone, they made money off this girl. They seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the rulers. And when they had brought them to the magistrates, they said, "These men are Jews, and they are disturbing our city. They advocate customs that are not lawful for us Romans to accept or practice." The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates tore the garments off them and gave them orders to beat them with rods. And when they had inflicted many blows upon them, they threw them into prison, ordering a jailer to keep them safely. Having received this order, he put them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in stocks. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's bonds were unfastened. When the jailer woke and saw that the prison doors were open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, supposing that the prisoners had escaped, because he would have been executed for not keeping his prisoners in the jail. But Paul cried out with a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." And the jailer called for lights and rushed in, and trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And they said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your whole household." And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And he took them at that same hour of the night and washed their wounds. And he was baptized at once, he and all his family. Then he brought them up into his house and set food before them. And he rejoiced along with his entire household that he had believed in God. But when it was day, the magistrates sent the police, saying, "Let those men go." And the jailer reported these words to Paul, saying, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Therefore, come out now and go in peace." But Paul said to them, "They have beaten us publicly, uncondemned men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And do they now throw us out secretly? No. Let them come themselves and take us out." The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens, because they weren't supposed to do that to Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and they took them out and asked them to leave the city. So they went out of the prison and visited Lydia, and when they had seen the brothers, they encouraged them and departed. So that is how the church came to be in Philippi. So suffice to say that once again, Paul was kicked out of somewhere and had to leave, and that was common for him. But he left behind a diverse group of believers, which is going to play into Philippians, because Philippians is going to be about unity, and we're going to hear about unity in several places in the book. The church at Philippi was probably Paul's favorite church. Never says that, but it was something of an apostle's pet, almost an anti-Galatia with which he was disgusted. But that doesn't mean they didn't have problems. As we'll see, they did have problems. But they had also been a faithful monetary supporter of Paul's. They had sent him money different times. And so that was another reason why he liked them. So the church was founded in the early 50s, not the 1950s, the OG 50s, as they say, the original 50s, and on Paul's first missionary journey, as part of Paul's first missionary journey. So the letter was probably written, it was obviously written after that, after he left, in the late 50s or the early 60s. Now, where is Paul when this is happening, or when he's writing this letter? Well, he's definitely in prison. We know that for sure. He tells us that much. The traditional opinion is that he's in prison in Rome. And we know he had been in prison in Rome. And in Philippians, he talks about the Praetorian Guard, which is a Roman guard, and he talks about the household of Caesar. Now, the household of Caesar wouldn't necessarily have to be in Rome, but it's likely that he would. Some scholars believe that he was in Ephesus or maybe Caesarea, but both of those ideas have difficulties. And so we'll stick with Rome, but we can't know for sure that it was Rome. Rome makes sense, but it can't be settled beyond all doubt. We also know that he's awaiting trial as he writes this letter, the outcome of which is unknown. He doesn't know if he'll be released or if he'll be martyred. But no matter where he was in prison, most scholars believe this wasn't his final imprisonment, that he will be released, he will be arrested again, and eventually he will be martyred. So why did he write it? This is kind of complicated. He wrote it for a number of reasons, and it's really a different sort of thing. Usually he wrote letters to solve issues in the church, and that is a little bit about what Philippians is about, but not a lot. First and foremost, it was a thank you note to the Philippian church because they gave him money. They sent him money, and they sent him that money was sent with a guy named Epaphroditus. And so Epaphroditus sends this gift, but they told Epaphroditus to stay with Paul and to help take care of him in prison. But what they were hoping would happen was that Paul then would send Timothy back to Philippi because they really liked Timothy. And part of the letter is explaining why, an explanation of why the bearer of the letter was Epaphroditus. The person who went back with the letter was Epaphroditus and not Timothy. It's also a plea for unity. These two women, Euodia and Syntyche, apparently were having a disagreement with one another. They didn't like one another. I don't know. Maybe you could call it a catfight. And so that was apparently affecting the whole church. That sort of that those two people, those two women that couldn't get along, was having, people were taking sides. Does that ever happen? Of course it does. People take sides, and then you're not friends anymore, and then all of that stuff, right? And that was happening in the Philippian church. I do feel sorry for Euodia and Syntyche. This is their one chance to be in the Bible. This is they're named in the Bible for not being able to get along. I'm sure they're up there going, why? Why did we argue about that? And he'll address them directly. He'll say, Euodia and Syntyche, you two need to get along. So he'll address them directly at the end of the letter. But unity is a focus of the entire letter. It's also an encouragement to rejoice. In spite of circumstance, as the threat of persecution loomed, he called them to rejoice. Even as he was in prison, he called them to rejoice. And then it was a warning against false teachers. Now, it's not as nearly as strong a strong warning as Galatians. Galatians is very strong, as we've talked about before. So the problem couldn't have been as bad as it was in Galatians. It's possible that false teachers were just starting to come into Philippi. It may be that he was so afraid that what happened in Galatia might happen in Philippi that it's a preventative. It's like, if these people come to you, beware of them. We don't know for sure, but it isn't as strong as Galatians. And then it's an explanation of Paul's circumstances, how he's doing. They were worried about their beloved apostle. So what we will see is that he concentrates more on the gospel than his personal situation, but he addresses that situation. So let's talk about a couple of the themes. We'll have to stop and pick up here tomorrow. One of the themes is Christian unity, that we're to be unified. And their unity was being tested from within, Euodia and Syntyche, and without. And so unity was necessary both for the survival and the witness of the early church. It was necessary that they be united. Because when Christians turn on each other, then people start saying, yeah, right, this Christian thing, it's not real. They can't even get along with each other. And that is still true in our world today. It is still vital that our witness in the world today, for our witness in the world today, that we be united. This is a quote from Dr. Thielman, and the quote within the quote is a quote from Deep. Christian unity is absolutely crucial to being a Christian, but that unity is only Christian if it is founded on the apostolic gospel of Christ and Him crucified. We belong to one another only through and in Jesus Christ. So there are some in our culture who would sacrifice the purity of the gospel on the altar of unity. Okay, we'll give in to this part of the gospel so that we can stay unified. Paul is not one of those people, nor should we be. He stands firmly on the gospel. You need to get on board with that. We don't need to get on board with what you're saying. So Paul's not going to tell the Philippian church to be united. He's not only going to tell the Philippian church to be united, he's going to model for them how to do that. And then the next thing is suffering. The next theme is suffering. Not in the sense of why God allows it, but rather our response to it when we suffer, and how God can work in and through our suffering. And Paul was pretty qualified to talk about that because he suffered over it. And that is closely related to the next theme, which is joy. Despite his circumstances, Paul was joyful. And he commanded the Philippians to be joyful as well. I'm just going to finish this up because it's the end of the day and we've got 30 seconds. And then the last one was the relationship between God's grace and human works. We're saved by grace alone, by grace alone, through faith alone. But then what is the purpose of and the reason for works, for living a godly life? And that's a common theme in Paul's writings. So that's the intro. Good job of getting that done. I would like your worksheets that you did for today. Those are due on, they're due tomorrow. This that I'm handing out to you as you leave is due on Monday.
What?
Yes.